Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. So I guess I'll get started with this lecture. Um, so for those of you who don't know, I've been teaching here at Purchase for the last 10 years. And I thought it would be interesting to give a lecture to tell you about my work and how it relates to teaching. Um, my work is informed by my personal experience as an Asian American woman and immigrant. And my artwork informs my teaching, which addresses both modern and historical concerns, as well as in both like technical skills and processes, as well as in terms of the images and ideas that I teach. I went to the University of California, Berkeley for undergraduate, and and then I went to University of Iowa for graduate. But in both schools, I was educated largely within a Eurocentric and American context, especially with the undergraduate. But over time, my interests have expanded to embrace more cultures and viewpoints that challenge the 20th century assumptions that were considered significant when I went to school. And by the way, feel free to type in questions in chat. And if I notice them, maybe I'll answer them along the way, or we can collect them and answer them at the end if it seems like, if I don't notice them. Okay, so I'm starting this painting, starting the talk with this painting that I did a couple of years ago. It is based on a NASA image of lava flows on the planet Venus. And it was a black and white image, and I imagined the colors as if I was traveling through different temperature zones. So my purpose was to very closely observe the satellite image and use it as a factual template, but using it knowing that as I interpreted it would become more a record of my own biases. So as an earthling, I'm concerned about climate change, for instance. I also tend to see faces and like green, lush landscapes in some areas, if I'm thinking, about maps. So none of these things are relevant to Venus, but that's how I kind of moved through the landscape as if I was imagining I was making a topographical map. So my point is that our subjective influences, our subjective experiences influence everything we see, even images of other planets that don't have faces or green landscapes or climate concerns. Though that says more about us than it does about Venus. And so this image represents certain things that I'm interested in, using a certain amount of factual data, but also using it to contrast against what eventually happens, which is that it reveals a lot about the viewer or the maker, and that there's some element of unpredictability in that, or some element of accident. So those are the things that come up a lot within my work. So the next image I'll show you is this large billboard that was printed in Vienna. And at the time, I originally thought I would just take that other painting and make a scan of it and send it out to be, printed on the billboard. But I miscalculated the number of pixels they needed. And I could have just blown it up a little more and that would have been fine, but it wouldn't have been perfectly sharp. And that's another thing, is I like things that are very kind of closely observed. But also I thought, well, this is a chance to be more imaginative. And so I basically added more by kind of mirroring and doubling certain parts of it. And so I think it ended up being a much more interesting piece. And so that's another theme that happens in my work, is this kind of happenstance, discovering things that happened, by accident.
Hey, Cynthia,
Yeah.
we're just seeing your video. We're not seeing.
Oh, that's, I'm sorry. You should have, I wish, yeah, you'd said that earlier. Maybe you did and I didn't notice in chat. So let me share the screen. Oh, I did that wrong. Okay. That's right. I forgot that we had unshared it. Okay, is that right now?
There we are. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this was the first image that I had been talking about in the dark. Sorry about that. So this is the first painting that was based on this template of the lava flows of Venus. And what I meant by kind of imagining a topographical map is that it felt as if some places seemed cold and some places seemed warm. Like the bottom right feels to me like icebergs, so it's as if I felt I was moving through different climate zones. And then this is the one that I, ended up adding to it. So the base of it is in the lower, kind of the 2/3 of the right lower corner is from the first image. And then I kind of mirrored and doubled it to make it big enough to fit the dimensions of the billboard. So I think that's a lot more interesting than it would have been if I had just sent out the first image. And so it was caused by a miscalculation that I decided to fix in a more interesting way. Here are details of that billboard image. And I think it reminded me of like patterns in a mosque, or somebody else said, a cathedral or something. It somehow seems strangely architectural, as if you're looking up at a ceiling of some kind of architectural, piece. And again, that has nothing to do with Venus. It started with something concrete and just moved increasingly to something kind of subjective, but I hesitate to say imagined. I mean, it is imagined in that it's coming from my head, but it was based on, something concrete and what that kind of, the imagination that sparked. Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit to give a little bit more history to my work. So this piece, let's see, is a small piece. It's only 11 by 14 inches, and it is silver point. It's a drawing of dust and hair and stuff. And the pieces of dust and hair are actual size, like they're just like 1 or 2 inches. And they're so convincingly actual size that after I describe what a silver point drawing is, there's always somebody that says, oh, that's very interesting, but how did you glue the hair on? And I just, after I had just described what a silver point drawing is, which I'm going to describe right now. So silver point drawing is you use a little piece of silver. So imagine like using an earring, for instance, it has or silver fork or something. I use a very small tip, but and then scratching it along a gessoed piece of paper. So the paper has a gesso primer on it that grabs the silver. So it looks like a pencil drawing, except it's a little bit more delicate and just a touch more. It doesn't really look silvery, but it just has a slightly different feel to it. This is a technique that was used by Leonardo da Vinci. That's what we associate silver point drawings with, is old mastered techniques like, used by Leonardo da Vinci to depict lovely subjects, such as a portrait of a young woman, something nice. And so by contrast, I'm drawing dust and hair, which, we don't usually think of as being nice when it's cut in, like this. So I'm using a technique to kind of subvert the conventions of what it is used for. And that's another theme in my work, is this interest in, subverting conventions. And the other thing about this piece is that, in a sense, it's kind of a miniature abstract expressionist painting, that it has a sense of movement and kind of a bodily influence and a sense of gesture and a sense of finding something along the way and finding things in kind of a subconscious way. So abstract expressionism is a combination of kind of physical movement and kind of tapping into the subconscious, kind of rooted in surrealism, tapping into subconscious and using that to kind of trigger certain associations. So I was interested in those kinds of things, and I learned about them a lot, as an undergraduate in Berkeley, which was, influenced by the Bay Area figurative artists a lot. Except that the difference is I'm doing it in miniature. And so I feel like what I brought to it is a kind of Asian sensibility of something very quiet and very focused, and of focus on calligraphy and how calligraphy and how writing and drawing are interrelated, that they're both forms of recording in Asian art. And so this, it seems like both a kind of recording, almost as if writing it or inscribing it, while also having this kind of abstract expressionist interest in physicality and gesture and the subconscious. So all of these are small drawings, kind of 11 by 19, 9 by 11 or so. That they have this weird illusion of looking as if there's dust that just kind of fell on the paper. But they're not. They're just little, marks with a silver point. So this is Leonardo da Vinci, a drawing by him, and this is what I mean by drawing of the light, the subtlety of light hitting a face, a lovely young woman. That's usually what we associate with the silver point. So I'm using it in kind of like a very, irreverent way. Another influence of mine briefly is Roger van der Weyden, and I was interested in certain things, even though the work looks very different than mine. There's a real intense interest in surface and a kind of slow sense of pace in that. There's a slightly staged quality, both the shallow space and the kind of theatrical poses. This strange combination of the artificial and the natural, which I'm interested in, and that it's a way of depicting something that is both highly dramatic and yet seems extremely, subdued or controlled at the same time. And here's a detail of what I mean by like the fur or the brocade is highly detailed, and it becomes kind of mesmerizing, a way of showing, in this case, extreme religious devotion or a kind of intensity that keeps you, staring at the space. Another person I'm interested in is Catherine Murphy. This is a drawing 28 by 40. And she also observes the everyday and mundane, but develops it into a very vast and slow, meaningful observation of something. Also, this title is Spill, and it seems to me like it's kind of like saying, don't cry over spilled milk. And I think she's also referring to the idea that artists find something, through an accident or through something unintended and make something really great out of it, which is, again, what I'm also interested in. And then curiously, this looks a little bit like a topography, as if it's a globe, the top of a globe or something. And that also, I'm interested in topographies. So a lot of connections here. And then Lucian Freud, again, back to the Leonardo thing, I mean, like using silver point, I'm interested in a different idea of beauty. So with a silver point, instead of drawing a face, I'm drawing, the bits of hair that are left over. And in the same way, his work, he's really interested in the kind of a very visceral connection and a very different idea of beauty. Okay, so back to my work here. So after drawing those silver point dust drawings for a few years, I began to really face up to the fact that a lot of people couldn't see them, especially people over the age of 45. And they would say, oh, I forgot my glasses. And I was like, oh my God, so they can't see the work. And it actually pushed me to realize that I really needed to go further with the work anyway. And so I was trying to figure out how could I maintain this interest in really looking at something closely to the point where it becomes this meditative extension of expanded experience of time. And that tension between the seductive and the repulsive, of wanting to look at something but having it be unbeautiful. And so I happened upon the idea of scanning body parts. And now a lot of people scan stuff all the time, but at the time, not everybody had a scanner. I'd just gotten one. It seemed like this new way of looking at things. And I was scanning them at really high DPI, so they were just insanely detailed. So I launched into this body of work. And here's a detail of it. And so the scanner, it was at such high DPI that the scanner took a long time to scan the image. And so, people had to breathe, you don't want to hold your breath for 9 minutes. And so a lot of this fogging that you see around here is condensation. And this is not an out of focus image. It's little dots of, little droplets of water that I've drawn. And there's even a little bit, I don't know if you can see my cursor when I do this, but on the right side there's a piece of dust, and there's a piece of dust, pressed against the condensation near the lip. So there's even dust caught, in there. So I'm really interested in images where there's so much information that the information actually obstructs the image, so that the image is being both constructed and obstructed at the same time. Let's see. So this one, as you can see, is really large. And it also is a good example of my interest in drawing things so factually that they become deeply mysterious. So I'm going to show a series of details of this. So the first detail is of the upper left corner. And this slide is not blurry. It's absolutely sharp. It's so hard to see these reproductions, but all these little marks are little pencil marks that almost kind of draw the pixels. So the way I make these is I print out a large photo and then I draw the photo. And so the photo itself is already kind of pixelated. And so I'm drawing, because it's so enlarged, and so I'm drawing the pixels. So this crystal clear photo feels kind of blurred because it's showing all these kind of pixels that are blurred. So the image is the detail that I'm drawing is at such a high level that it's actually obstructing, the information is obstructing your ability to kind of see the image or kind of know the image. So I'm interested in that tension between seeing and knowing, that you're seeing so much that you can't know the image in a sense, So here's another example of an area that, is highly pixelated. And this is kind of the middle of that image. So here's the image again. So it's the middle left of that panel. So I guess I'll move through to this one. So as you can see, some of these areas become really, really hard to identify. This one feels to me more like marsh grasses, along a pond or something, which actually makes sense because what you're seeing is the condensation. So all those little squares are like pixelated water droplets. So you're seeing this kind of condensation and then the eyebrow. So structurally, it is similar to marshes, marsh grasses, marsh weeds or something in the water. And so the associations that one might have do actually make sense. And again, here is, so it's the upper middle there. And as you move from left to right, this image becomes increasingly mysterious. So the far right panel, I think, is the most mysterious. And so you have the condensation on the left, and it's making the glass of the scanner blurry. So that's what's causing this weird blurring at the upper left of this detail. And then the inside corner of the nose is what you're seeing on the right side, and it doesn't, doesn't completely touch the scanner, because of, it's too three-dimensional, even when you try to press it down. And so that's why you're also getting more blurring. So again, the attempt to try to see, I'm recording the attempt to try to see, including all the obstructions like sweating and, and not being able to touch the glass of the scanner and stuff. So, I'm really interested in this attempt to find the facts only to be obstructed by one's own, sidetracked by one's own interests. And as you might have noticed, by the way, the image, just like this one too, reads as kind of like long, it could read as 3 long scrolls, especially the other one, the scrolls, the sections were even a little bit more narrow. And so it does seem a little bit like a series of Chinese landscape scrolls. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that kind of flatter space of Asian art is something that I'm also interested in. This one, I guess I've also realized, because of this scale, could also be perceived as like a picture, like somebody not in New York who has like a big living room, like a picture window, that often people have those big picture windows in their living room where there are kind of like 3 big panes of glass. And so this, feels a little bit like it has that quality to it as well. One thing about and so here are a few details. So this is the left side. So one thing about the scanner is that it photographs everything equally, from top to bottom, the perspective is always equal. Unlike Western perspective, where with like Renaissance perspective, there's one viewpoint and everything, as things get further away from you, they get smaller, and, there's a vanishing point. But with Asian art, when there's like a, picture of a mountain or something, one moves across evenly as if you're always kind of near the mountain, not as if you're looking at, things that are closer and further so much. So this kind of vertical scroll-like quality that comes from the scanner, I feel like has a relationship with Asian art. And here's a more zoomed in, the bottom half of this one, more zoomed in. So again, there's all this condensation I don't know if you figured out this was, a mouth with teeth. And so like there's a tooth there, and there's condensation on the, surrounding the tooth. This one, so these are teeth at the top and the lip pressed down at the bottom and condensation in the middle, but I can't help but feel like this looks like the night sky, like an urban, night sky or something. And so those kinds of, associations are what I think, reflect my personal experience, since I'm an urban person, and I like night skies. And so, I like the way these things seem to say more, I try to find an image that seems so open-ended that you can't help but interpret things that reveal something about yourself. In my thesis paper that I wrote in graduate school, my painting was very, very different back then. But I happened to mention that a formative experience was when I was like 3 years old, and we were living in Canada, but it was always seemed like it was freezing cold in Canada all the time. And the only way that I could look out the window, since I was only 3 years old, was to jump on the radiator and look out the window, because I, couldn't reach the window. But since it's freezing cold, the radiator was always burning hot, and it was creating condensation on the glass. And looking out onto the, the glass, I was breathing on it and creating more condensation, And so that idea of looking through a window at, condensation, and going through a lot of trouble to see out the window, because then my feet would be burning hot and I have to jump back down. And so all of that made me So I had written about that in graduate school and completely forgotten about it for a while. And then a friend from graduate school saw some of this work and reminded me of that little memory about window and condensation. And I had forgotten that I had ever, said that. And I find it so interesting because it just proves to you that you're always you, even if you aren't thinking about, like I have a lot of students who are always worried, like, oh, this work won't be about me. And it's like, it'll be about you, even if you don't want it to be, and, students who say, I'm worried that what I'm doing isn't, important enough, or I didn't live an important life. What can I paint? And, I use that as an example that you don't have to live some kind of, sexy, amazing, exciting life. You just have to, use whatever you have, no matter how unglamorous it is. And I'm sure it will come through and, could be interesting material. This is a scale shot because this drawing seems deceptively small, but it's, quite large. It's probably about 6 feet tall. So here's a better photograph of it. And this one was one of the most detailed. Oh, this is this detail I put in here because it shows him moving during the scan. So a lot of the blurs in the middle of the work are places where the scanner skipped because he was moving. And later on, he said it was so hard to keep still because he had too much coffee. So I put that in. Oh yeah, this one shows it even more clearly, actually, where you could see where he moved. And so I chose that part of the drawing, part of the scan to make the drawing of, because again, I'm interested in the information captured that shows how difficult it is to actually see and make the work. And here's the other side, the other panel of this. And this always reminds me of like the ocean a little bit, the aerial view of waves or something. So this is one of the most detailed, I was saying earlier, one of the most kind of obsessive, and that I do think that the time spent becomes a very, like, becomes a metaphor for a longing to connect, or a longing for intimacy, or a desire to kind of know something. While, like I said, I actually think that what's interesting is what you can't know, or what becomes obstructed. This shape, I feel like, reminds me a little bit of like somebody looking through a doorway, or a keyhole or something. And also that this is an image of lips, and the top part is again blurred out because of condensation. Here's a detail of the condensation, especially on the upper left side. And that idea of pressing your nose against the glass is something that I think we associate with like a child looking through a window, or, feeling like they don't get to go outside and play, like they don't, get to be invited, or, a feeling of longing, or being, looking out at something and not being able to participate. And of course, now with COVID, this has even more associations. I forgot to mention these are all details, but yeah, so these are all associations that I think developed in the work. A few more artistic influences. So here's an example of a Chinese calligraphy scroll, Chinese scroll with calligraphy and ink brush painting, I should say. And there is a difference between the, the lower part and the top part, but you feel kind of like it isn't a Renaissance perspective painting. You feel like you're definitely at the ground at the bottom part, but as you move up the scroll, it feels more like you're still pretty close to the mountain, not like you're at the bottom looking up, so it feels as if you're kind of traveling up the mountain with the, a close view that feels more like a scanner, as opposed to Renaissance perspective. This is Ana Mendieta. and she's pressing her face against a piece of plexi. This is well before scanners, but she's deliberately trying to challenge the male gaze, by making an unbeautiful depiction of a woman. So in that sense, I feel a relationship with this work. I will say that I had not been thinking about this work when I did, when I did these drawings of people's faces pressed against the glass. And I'm actually glad I didn't, because it might have stopped me from doing it, because I would have thought, oh, it's too similar to hers. But it's really not. I mean, now I see that the connection is this challenging the male gaze, but her work doesn't have the slowness, and the kind of mystery about it that mine does. And then here's another connection is David Hammond's. This might still be up at the Drawing Center in New York, by the way, if you want to see it. And so he covered people with oil or grease and then pressed them against the paper, and then dusted the paper with charcoal so it grabbed the places where there was oil. So again, similar to the scanner in that there is a feeling of an imprint, and also the kind of physicality, the idea of trying to record the body in an unusual way. So this is a drawing of scabs that somebody got when they fell off their bike. And you could kind of tell from the coded thing on the title, by the way. So I started doing these drawings of scars and scabs. And I mean, one thing is that I'm interested in this kind of tension between beauty and horror. Let's see, there was something. Yeah, and that these seem even more like landscapes to me. And that idea of a force of nature that's kind of greater than you are. Changing, your topography is something that becomes alluded in these landscapes as well. I just realized, I just looked at the clock and realized that I'm talking way too long. So I'm going to move through some of these more quickly. But well, I do have to say these two were self-imposed cigarette burns. I don't know if anybody noticed that. It's one of those things that I wouldn't have known that looking at these scars. The person had to tell me, but those who know what those are. So there are a lot of really, complicated narratives in these. Here are, I will move very quickly. So here are some source photos, things from NASA photos, the forces of nature, as I mentioned, sonograms, as you might imagine. So one of the things I'll say about the scars is that I at first worried that I was taking advantage of people by drawing their scars, but I very quickly realized the opposite was true, that they were so honored that, because this is like an act of devotion, of really like making something important and beautiful. And it kind of made them feel a little better about having suffered this terrible thing that happened to them, because it kind of celebrates their survival of it, that the fact that they are still alive to have the scar. So I feel like the work is hopefully difficult to look at, but also very celebratory. It celebrates the fragility, but also the strength to heal of human nature. And this is a heart surgery scar, by the way, that I purposely made very confusing. Okay, so I'm going to have to move through some of these a little more quickly because I got a little too excited about talking. Okay, so this image I showed earlier, and so I was asked to be in a big group show, and they had this cute little idea that you had to send it in a FedEx box. And I was not going to fold this up and send it in a FedEx box. So I ended up scanning this piece and making a Citrusol transfer. I inverted it too, because after I scanned it, I realized that I had to do something more interesting. So it's the same size, so it's about 7 feet tall, but it's made of a series of scanned and printed pieces. And so this launched a new body of work where I would invert images, sometimes images of things that I had drawn already. And it made them more, I feel like it almost turned them into a fossil or something. They seemed much more tactile and harder to identify while still having some kind of human connection. And so it was a way to get away from things that were easy to name, because I felt that the work was being too kind of quickly named and then dismissed, and too caught up in representation. So I took this scan, actually not this image, but it was when I scan these, the scan is much bigger and I choose a very small section, but I took this face that I had drawn before and inverted it, and also took a bigger section of it and made this large drawing. So this is an inverted, so the idea of inverting things in order to make them harder to read and more, I feel like more kind of tactile, as if you're trying to touch your way to recognition, where it was, the textures are identifiable, but because the blacks are white and the whites are black, it's harder for the mind to say, I know what that is. Okay, very quickly, Jasper Johns did a whole series of work like this one based on this photo. So this photo with a big tear in it was mirrored, and so there the tear is in the middle, and the guy is there, like that's his hand. So that gave me encouragement to take an idea and make several iterations of it. And then another influence was Van Gogh for his mark making. And so I took this piece, which here's a scale shot of it, just so you can see that it's quite large. It's almost 6 feet square, and highly detailed. Oh, I have details to show you. So it's extremely detailed. So I scanned the whole thing. I'm still showing you details. And here's around the nose, the condensation, the water on the upper half of this detail, by the way, and there's the whole thing. So I took this image. I was very happy with this drawing, but I did feel like it was becoming this thing where when people knew what it was, like, it's like, oh, it's the space between the mouth and the nose. And then they stopped looking at it, and I felt like there was a lot more to look at. So I scanned that image and then inverted it and made a citrusol transfer from it. And then, being a drawing painting person, and this is basically like making a print of it, and I'm not a printmaker. I just ended up having to draw it. So this is the same image, but this one's like all hand drawn instead, because the print wasn't satisfying enough for me. And then here's another version where it's kind of more abbreviated. And just so you see, this was the original drawing, and then this was the hand-drawn, inverted, scanned, and then inverted one. And by the way, the scanner did all kinds of weird things with contrasts, which is why it's very uneven looking. And then I drew all those mistakes. So I was really, becoming interested in drawing a lot of these mistakes here. So all this, these uneven squares are when the scanner would change contrasts on me. And at first I was very upset, and then I realized it was really, really interesting. So these are all details of this piece. And then I realized I could take this piece and scan it and make new paintings from it. So this is actually a 7-foot tall painting of a little section from here. And then I made another really big painting. So this one is the same size as the original drawing. So it's like almost 6 feet square, but it's just of a tiny spot. It's the upper right spot. There's this little white spot. And that's what this painting is. So here's the painting again. So it's 6 feet square, and it's based on that. And all these little weird gaps and rectangular spots, those were all mistakes that were made along the way, because it's been scanned and painted and scanned and painted. So like, yeah, it looks like it's pieced together, but this is all painted as one big piece of paper, but I painted all the little gaps and mistakes. Oh, here's a more zoomed in where you could see little gaps that, were pixelated and stuff because they weren't scanned properly. So, so it becomes this kind of recording of something I'd seen over and over and over again. And then the last piece I did of this series was I took that square painting and I scanned that whole thing and then pieced it together. But when I scanned it, every time I scanned it, it's really, I mean, this thing is like 6 feet, wide, and I'm trying to scan it. And so I keep making mistakes and having to repeat sections of it in order to fill up holes that were created. So this piece looks kind of like the other one, except there are all these kind of repetitions and skips in it. So that was the last of that variation. And then I did the same thing with this, where this was a scanned and then inverted old drawing that became a new painting, and then a second version, and here's the detail of it. And again, this is all painted. So the parts that are blurry were mistakes that then I painted and painted in the blurs. And then this is like another version where I zoomed in and did a smaller section from the previous painting. And all of that came from this piece here that was, again, inverted and then turned into all those things before. Okay, I'll just quickly, I'm not going to say anything about this one because I know I have to hurry through it. So this image is related to the ones I started the lecture with. That same lava flows on Venus image, but a very different variation. So like I said, I was kind of encouraged by Jasper Johns to take an image and reinterpret several times. So this is kind of done through Scratchboard, actually, where I had several layers of paint and sketched through them unevenly. And, so that's where you get all the different colors. And so this was the piece I started the lecture with. You could see it was the same image, but two very, very different treatments. And I have a few details so you could see it a little bit more closely. And this, like this area, I felt like had a kind of temperature difference, as if it felt like glaciers. And then this was the billboard where I repeated that previous painting, as I mentioned, repeated sections of it. Just for context, so you could see how these are all based on the same image of the lava flows from Venus. And this one, these colors have, what's called this, what's it called? I would say complementary contrast. Simultaneous contrast, right? Where they're almost, but not quite straight complementary colors. So they kind of vibrate. And I was, this is what I mean by subconscious. I was listening to the impeachment trials when I was doing this, and I felt like the complementary vibration, that the polarizing of the nation seemed to inspire kind of vibrating, the colors fighting each other, the way that country is fighting each other. So these are all details. So that it's based on a factual template, but the color interpretation seems based more on what's happening in the world. This is based on a Google image of the border between Mexico and the United States. It's actually the Yuma Oregon cactus, that's what it's called, park, between the United States and Mexico. And that line there is the border between the two. This is a small monotype. And then here's another variation of the same image. So, so I'm using factual information, but reinterpreting it in a way that seems to reflect other concerns. This does seem a lot like global warming, again, like the sun burning, and it is a depiction of the desert, but these are not the colors that one would see there. You can kind of see, if your screen is big enough, that it actually says United States there. So you can see it was from a Google map. And then this is, so it's along the same idea. So these are images based on topographical maps. And I guess I kind of forgot to mention, you know, that after doing those inverted images, that I, you know, started to become interested in topography in a larger, you know, in a larger view beyond the topography of one's skin. So this is actually a painting of Lake Superior during a blizzard. It's turned sideways because some of you who know the shape of Lake Superior, well, actually, if you know the shape of Lake Superior, you would have known it was turned sideways. But for those of you who don't, it's turned sideways, and this diagonal you see on the upper part of the painting is the border between Canada and the US. And so I also like the fact, oh, here's a detail of what I mean by the border. Because why should we draw Canada and the US with Canada above the US, like on a north-south axis? Like who made that one up, right? I think this looks better, it just made a better painting. And so I thought, yeah, it was a chance to kind of challenge, these assumptions of how we think we should look at the map. And I also feel like this seems like, it reminds me of like a snow angel. Again, maybe that's just me, but I kind of feel like I pursued this idea of snow further, like the wing of a bird over a landscape or something. And then here's another interpretation of the same lake over during the blizzard, with the colors very much changed in this one. And this one, the lake is more recognizable. And all these shapes, by the way, are all very carefully taken from the Google map. So, the only thing that's changed is the color. All these, like anybody who lives there would know a lot of these little lakes, and up close would even know some of the whatever streets or little things, but it's mixed in with clouds and snow and stuff. And the color, I feel like, adds a totally other sense of drama about it. I mean, I personally feel like, so this one was actually done during COVID. The other one was started before COVID, and then I started painting it during COVID. And I began to realize it felt like a nostalgic painting of times when things were beautiful. And this one feels to me much more fractured during a time when, of confusion and uncertainty. And then the last piece that I'll show you is this one, which also has, I think, a fraught feeling about it, that it is a snowstorm over Northern Europe, mostly over the ocean. But there are certain parts of it that there's like a little hint of land on it. But I clearly chose a section that was extremely abstract so that I would have the freedom to interpret it, but have it still based on something concrete. And that difference between the interpretation, in this case, I'm really taking liberties with the color. But most of the shapes, I think all the shapes are, things that were there. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention with this one is that even though all the shapes are actual things, one thing that happened was that I silk screened the image onto gessoed canvas, and the silk screens were too large. I had never silk screened anything in my life. And so, and it was on gesso. And so the whole silk screen just kind of smashed on there. And so you're seeing like all these blobs of paint just squished everywhere. Like that is just like a blob of paint. I mean, the silk screen, printmakers would just laugh at me, but I thought it looked amazing. So, it fit into my interest in finding something accidentally that was originally based on very specific, concrete facts. So all this like paint that's gone, totally out of control was because of bad silk screening, but the basic shape, and a lot of these basic parts like that is all, still well defined. Oh, that was the last image. Okay, so I guess I've managed to to talk fast enough to get all that in. Any questions? Thanks for listening to my speed talk there. Faye has, are you just
I-
waiting or did you have a question?
No, I
Okay,
have
oh,
a
yeah,
question.
yeah, I said,
So I'm sorry, I actually missed a lot of the lecture because my internet kept checking out on me. So it was so interesting, and the new paintings are so beautiful, but
oh, thanks.
how big is that last painting?
The last one is 60 by 42, so it's about 5 feet.
So they're very,
tall.
very big paintings.
Yeah, which is why the silk screen was a total. I mean, if the printmaker saw it, they would just be, you know, printmaking, you're dying laughing. I mean, it's just like the worst. I mean, the first time I did it, I could tell it was, I mean, I even practiced and I couldn't get it right. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go for it. Anyway, I saw that and I knew it was ridiculous, but I thought it was like genius. I'm like, this is so much more interesting than regular silk
Well,
screen.
you're not doing it. You're not making a print. So
Yeah. Somebody asked if the previous image of the woman was also pencil. Which image was that?
That was me. This is Stacy. It was the woman with her face pressed against the plexiglass.
Oh, no, that was a photo. Yeah, I'm sorry, I went through that so quickly. That was on in Mendieta, and she was photographing herself pressed against a piece of plexi in order to, yeah. So that wasn't mine. That was I mean, the artwork is the photo of her.
Great, thank you.
Oh, Phil?
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, Phil.
Congratulations, a wonderful
Thanks.
presentation.
Thanks.
What comes through very powerfully is how the microscopic and the histological is in fact the celestial.
Mhm,
How the microcosm and macrocosm are in
Mhm.
fact the same.
mhm, yeah.
You know, an overwhelming notion.
Mhm.
Also, I love the powderiness of them and the almost pastel-like. Very beautiful. I mean, exquisite. So, bravo, bravo.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for coming too.
is that the Lake Superior? Is that the actual painting behind you, or is it?
No,
one of
it's, I'm not standing in front
Okay.
of the painting.
I was thinking, wow,
yeah.
it really is big.
Well, it's a little bit smaller than that, but it's 8 feet tall. Yeah, so it's a fairly large painting. Any other questions? I know I ran through it fast because I knew I had too many images in there.
Well, thank you, Cynthia, and thank you everyone for your participation. This is Stacy Leisner, who I'm working with the Alumni Office of Alumni Engagement on Alumni Weekend. So we want to thank all of you for participating in this presentation tonight and invite you to join us for programs throughout the rest of the week. We really have enjoyed having you with us this evening, and thank you all for coming. And again, Cynthia, thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
Good night, all.
My pleasure.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And we will have a recording next week. Great.
Great. Yeah.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.